Hi, my name is Jennifer Eisen. I'm an assistant professor at the College of Wooster. Thank you so much for joining us virtually to discuss researching with undergrad students. I just finished my 5th year at the College of Wooster. The College of Wooster is a small liberal arts school in Northwest Ohio, an undergrad-only institution. We are somewhat unique in the fact that all undergrad students must complete a year-long research project that we call IS. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my experience with IS and specifically how I've used self-reflection and cohort building in IS mentoring. Right, so you'll probably hear this a number of times during this colloquium, but mentored undergrad research is a powerful teaching tool. I've had a number of students tell me how they've learned critical thinking skills and problem-solving skills. There's also been recent pedagogical research that shows that early research experience in undergrad, especially if it's like course-embedded research or lab-based research project, can help retention in STEM majors. So what is the College of Wooster's IS or Independent Study Program? So as I mentioned earlier, all students across all departments do have to do this. It's a year-long program where they do have a final thesis. In biology, it's actually a 3-semester program. So first, in the spring of their junior year, students will make a research proposal and go through a course to have a project development course. And then in their senior year, they'll take 2 independent research courses where they'll conduct their experiments. Then they'll write up their study in a final written IS or written thesis. They'll orally defend that thesis to 2 faculty members. And then they'll present that research at the IS symposium in the spring. And then many of them will also present outside of Worcester as well. So this is Avery and Mia here, both of which are just recently graduated seniors, both of which are presenting their ISs here at Virtual Botany. I have been asked how IS kind of differs from honors thesis programs at other institutions. And while every institution is different, I have advised to honors thesis at 2 other liberal arts institutions. And I'd say day to day, there are a lot of similarities, which is why I think some of what I've experienced with IS might resonate with you. But there are some key differences that I think you could take and incorporate into your own department. One would be, since every student does it, there's less of a barrier to entry into research. So at other institutions, sometimes students will have to find a professor to do research with, and that is a barrier because there are certain students who won't necessarily know or feel comfortable seeking out a professor. I know some institutions now have started implementing like application processes or other things to try to reduce that barrier. Also find just because every student does it, it's more built into our curriculum. And it also makes doing cohort building a little more seamless. To give you an idea of the different IS projects I've mentored, in the last 5 years, I've had 18 different IS students. 9 of them have been primarily field-based IS projects. 5 of them have been primarily lab-based IS projects using things like microsatellite markers or using a microscope to count pollen grains. I've had 3 that have been flight cage-based IS projects. Here's Jess and Casey, who just graduated, that did a flight cage project. And then I've had 1 modeling-based project. So mentoring IS projects or independent study projects has definitely been a learning curve. And I definitely always am thinking about how to adjust my mentoring style. But I would say that my first year, I made a lot of mistakes. And after my first year of mentoring, I made some really dramatic or significant changes to my mentoring style. So what I found after my first year is I found that students that I had undergrads that were not making enough progress week to week. I had some that were making just fine progress, but they were concerned a lot about the progress they were making. I felt some of them were feeling very isolated as well, which is unfortunate because, all students are doing these research projects. So it'd be nice if they could form a cohort. And then many of them were unprepared for our individual meetings. And to be honest, so was I. I was not really prepared for our individual meetings. So we were doing hour-long individual meetings a week, and they weren't necessarily very productive meetings. So to reevaluate my IS mentoring style, I did a few different things. So after my first year, I workshopped IS mentoring with another new faculty member, and I talked to a lot of different colleagues. I also really took feedback from IS students. So in nearly every single year, except for some years due to end of the year busyness, I have used course evaluations. And these are anonymous from the students. I don't look at it till after the students have graduated. Of course, I do know that the comments might be a little bit filtered just because I only have 4 to 6 IS students and they might be a little wary of what they write in it. That said, I've gotten incredibly good advice and feedback from course evaluations. For this talk in particular, when I was picking what to highlight in terms of my IS mentoring style or just IS in general at the College of Wooster, I asked former IS students to submit I asked them to submit a survey that could or be anonymous if they wanted it to, and I asked them specifically the most useful aspects of the IS structure, and then I asked them advice you would give to a new undergrad research mentor, and I will share some of their really fantastic advice with you later. So one thing that was really clear in the survey that I got from former IS students is that they really appreciated cohort building and they appreciated being in a lab with other peers doing research as well. In particular, a number of them mentioned IS projects that are part of a larger research project. So for example, down here, I have Jack, Elizabeth, and Ashley. All three of them worked on a bellflower project. And they worked on different aspects. So they were asking different questions, but they all came together for a larger project, and they really enjoyed that. Over here, I have Jess and Casey, and they did what we call a collaborative IS project. So it was a bigger project where they collected all the data together and then wrote it up independently, and it was a flight cage project, and it worked really well because it was very hard to care for the bees day to day by yourself, but by having a collaborator, it was attainable. The other thing that was a really, really common theme in the survey is that students really appreciated weekly group meetings. Pretty much all of them mentioned group meetings. So what we do is we have a weekly group meeting in the fall, and this is a half an hour to an hour long meeting where the students will come and just talk with each other about their struggles and their successes with IS. Sometimes they'll present a little bit about what they're doing. It's also a great opportunity for me to tell everyone, kind of the next steps so that I'm sure that everyone has heard the same messaging. In addition to that, in the spring, we'll do what we call writing workshops, and these are actually an afternoon, so 2 to 3 hours where they get together and we'll write and peer review each other. So the other thing I changed up after my first to second year was doing self-reflection and progress feedback for those individual meetings. So I do meet with students individually, and in my first year it was an hour-long meeting, and they were not particularly productive meetings. In my second through fifth year, they're 20 to 30-minute meetings, and those meetings are pretty structured. And they're pretty structured in the fact that before the meetings, the students write a self-reflection. And this self-reflection isn't just a narration of what they did the last week, but I try to get them to dig deeper and think about how they're feeling about IS, how they're progressing, if they have any concerns that they want to discuss with me. And I find it really, really helpful for me to get to know the students early on. They also do a self-progress score. And so what I found, as I mentioned early on, is that some students weren't making enough progress and some were making just fine progress, but they were concerned they weren't making enough progress. So the self-progress score is scaled from 1 to 3, with 2 being good, steady progress. So most students in most weeks should give themselves a 2. And then some weeks they'll give themselves a 3 because it was a really great week. And some weeks, things happen and that's fine. They give themselves a 1 and it's still averaging out to a 2. And this has been incredibly helpful for me as a mentor because I'll find out that there's students that are doing really, really good, but they keep giving themselves a 1. So we can then discuss like, oh no, you're doing really well. Like that was a 2 or a 3. Like this is the progress you should be making. I also wanted to share some really insightful advice that students provided for new mentors. So basically in the survey, I asked students to imagine that they were giving advice to a new research mentor and what advice would they give? And they gave some really insightful advice. And you can actually find all of their advice here. I posted a PDF that actually has all of their advice anonymous here on my website. So sorry, I'm going to look over at some quotes. The first thing they said is to make sure to balance guidance. So balancing guidance, one wrote, a few of them mentioned this. For a mentor, there is a balance to how much guidance they choose to provide to a student. Providing too much guidance stifles the intellectual growth of the student, while too little guidance leaves the students lost and stressed out. And I think that's really good advice. They also, a few of them mentioned that, like students are very different. And so one approach might not always work, and that you need to be able to adjust your approach. Another student mentioned just the value of being vulnerable. And they mentioned that, they were really nervous when they started the research project, and that they assumed my professors knew everything. It was eye-opening and reassuring when you shared things that you didn't know, or things that you struggled with, that you struggled with. Another student mentioned the importance of faculty being advocates of diversity and inclusion in their department, and that undergraduate researchers really do notice who's being an advocate for those things, and that can be make a research experience a more welcoming experience. So I do want to highlight some of the research that our lab is presenting here at Virtual Botany. Avery and Mayana are both presenting work that looks at siren success or male fitness based on native bees and a prey plant, Echinacea angustifolia. Avery's talk is actually on her IS work, and Mayana is presenting a poster both in the reproductive processes sections. And then Mia Stevens here is presenting her IS work, a talk where she in the population genetics and genomics section, looking at the spatial genetic structure and pollen movement in coral bean, which is a desert plant. So please go check those out. Finally, I just want to thank you for your attention in this virtual presentation. I really enjoyed sharing my experience with you. I hope some of it resonates with you, and I would love to hear feedback on your experience. I think exchanging information is just incredibly powerful. I want to thank all of the amazing individuals I've worked with over the years, and definitely thank Ed and Carolina for organizing this colloquium, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Thanks.